Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Side Quests. This is episode 150. We're here, we've made it. And we're here to talk about a game that once you see the guests on this episode, you will probably already have guessed what we are talking about. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. I'm the producer of this series. I am one of the hosts of Fun and Games and a host of Too Many Podcasts on the Certain POV Podcast Network. And I am joined by two incredible humans, starting with my co-host on Fun and Games.
Hi there, I'm Geoff Moonen. I'm an actor, musician, Twitch streamer, obsessive video game collector, and the other host and producer for Fun and Games Podcast on the Certain POV Network.
And my other guest.
I'm Alex Lavelle. I am an Atlanta area director and stage manager. I podcast on Certain POV about comics on Panelology. Just wrapped an Animorphs podcast called Minds at Yerk, and the ever on hiatus Rob Thomas, no, not that one, Robcast, which someday, theoretically, will return. What else do? I don't know. I do other things. I play a lot of video games.
It's true, you do.
Yeah.
I do.
If anyone's been on our Discord server, you usually see me, Geoff, or Alex yelling about something regards to games. And the game we are talking about, we have yelled about a lot. If you listen to our main show episode about the Metroid franchise, we are here to talk about Metroid Dread, the latest in the Metroid franchise. And I'm very excited to have you both here to talk about it in a longer form. For a little insider baseball, pretty much right after we wrapped the Fun and Games episode talking about the franchise, I posited this, and Geoff and Alex immediately agreed because it just made sense.
We knew we loved the game already.
Yeah, and we were all at a point where we had played some amount. Matt, maybe you had
I think
finished.
I was the first to finish, yeah.
Yes.
And we sat around, kicked around theories afterward that we didn't want to talk about on the episode of spoilers. We have had to set our own separate group chat to talk about Metroid, to keep that out of the CPOV servers and not spoil things for people.
And also to be obsessive about the series.
Right. This was a foregone conclusion. This was inevitable.
I think typically we started the previous longer forms talking about our experience to the game or the franchise, but we've done that in a previous episode. And also this game is only on Switch. It's brand spanking new. But I do want to tell a little fun story about how, when E3 was happening, right before this was announced, I was watching some of the E3 presentations in the Discord, and Alex had joined me for a bunch of them. And for the Nintendo one, Alex was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. We're both big Nintendo fanboys. It'll be fun. And when this trailer started, I had a complete blind spot on Dread because I didn't even know that it had started to be made and then kind of disappeared. And so when Metroid 5 appeared on screen, I absolutely lost my mind, and so did Alex. And so it's fun that we got to experience that together, and now we're here many months later after the release to talk about the game at length.
Yeah, there was this moment for me that was almost... Denial is not quite the word, but this form of shock of, wait, we're getting this? This is a real game now? Nintendo is announcing it, and it's coming out very soon? Because this has become Nintendo's MO, right? They give you 6 months notice, maybe, once they know a game is close to ready to go. Unless they need to announce something on the horizon, High Breath of the Wild sequel.
Yeah, which is in contrast to how they announced Metroid Prime 4, which is, it's essentially an announcement of, it's what would come next if we were making it, and I guess we're making it now. Whereas this was the exact, here it is. You have no time to prepare.
Because one time Satoru Iwata said, we're making a new Smash Brothers game, and then caught Sakurai and said, hey, you want to do this, right? It worked once, and now it just happens sometimes. But we waited longer between Fusion and Dread than the wait between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace.
Wow.
It was a 2-year longer wait for this game than between Star Wars trilogies.
Wow.
Which just, in the context of the span of my life, those two feel like much different gaps. I would not have believed. I had to go do the math and double check and look up release dates to make sure this was not my mind playing tricks on me. I pulled out a calculator to double check my math. It was 18 months longer for this game.
Oh my God, you're right.
That's wild. That's such a wild thing to think about. Well, I think because for a lot of us, it was a foregone conclusion that we were just never getting another 2D Metroid. Prime had become so successful. Metroid Prime 4 was announced almost immediately as a concept and a logo. when the Switch was unveiled. And so, like, I just had written off the 2D franchise, which was my favorite part of it, admittedly in the previous episode, because I haven't played the Prime games yet. But like the fact that it happened is still feels like a dream that didn't actually happen. Like I meant to replay it before we did this episode, but I didn't get around to it. But like it just still kind of feels like a fantasy, and I want to go back and play it again. A, because it's only 8 to 10 hours depending for the non-completion version of the game. But also because like I want to keep remembering it and like become as obsessed with this as other games in the franchise. And I just think it's wild that we're here. I do want to say up top, we are probably going to talk spoilers. We will flag it when we get there. We've all beaten the game, right? I just want to make sure for sure. Yes. So we are going to talk spoilers because I think the end of this game is one of the more fascinating things about it, because the creator has said this is the end of Samus's arc for these games. But that doesn't mean there's no Samus. That doesn't mean there's not more Metroid. It just means this arc that started in the original Metroid on NES is done. I'm curious what that means. But like, there will be spoilers for the narrative later. But let's talk a little bit about the game itself and how it plays. Because, and I feel like we said this in our preview in the Funny Games episode, but this is the best Samus has ever controlled, I think, in a game ever. It made going back, because I did mess around with like Fusion and a few others again, even though I had just replayed them just to see. But even in the remake of Samus Returns, which was made by the same company, Samus controls great, but not this good. This is the best Samus has ever moved through a space.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's the thing that I think, because we tend to talk about Metroidvania as a genre, that kind of falls away sometimes in that conversation, is these are, in their roots, platformers of a variety. And I remember reading at some point between when the game was announced and when it came out, a conversation with its director saying part of the reason why it took 19 years is the technology was not there for us to be able to make this game in the way that we wanted. And I think that's got to be part of this equation, that the feel of this, that the smoothness and control of this as a platformer needed to be very precise and very locked down in order to make this experience what it was. And I could see if it played like, as much as I love Fusion, if it played like Fusion, there would have been things that were too clumsy and were frustrating.
Absolutely.
The Emmy sections would have felt impossible.
Yeah, the fact that Metroid has had very few releases as far as the side-scrolling Metroidvania, that series that it is. And at any point when it's come out, it has felt, if not cutting edge, then definitely of the time, of smooth controls, of it just feels good to play and do. And yeah, you're right. If Super Metroid played like NES Metroid, it would not be the venerable entry that it is. And as things have moved on, and certainly as Metroidvanias as a genre, as a whatever, has exploded and evolved over the last 19 years or so, and certainly even over the last 5 or 10 years, the amount of Metroidvanias that are out there, the amount of control experiences and ideas that have sprung up from the indie space and the AAA studios. Metroid Dread had to step up and do that, and yeah, it did it with style.
The other game that comes to mind in that way was Kid Icarus Uprising, which, if Kid Icarus was almost the prototype of Metroid, which more or less historically it was.
Yes, it was.
The idea that game shipped with a specialized stand because to get the controls right, they needed to make sure you didn't have to hold the 3DS. Like, that speaks to, even just in the 5-6 years between these games, how far that technology and these tools have come to make something precise and clean and easy to play.
Yeah, I will say the one thing I do miss from Samus Returns is the on-screen map on the second screen. Like, having a map all the time was great, but the way they designed the mini-map in this game worked really well. And it was a good, alternative, though not perfect. I love how this game looks. It is one of the most beautiful Metroid. And I was nervous because sprite work is a dying breed. Some games are coming back to it. We do have Triangle Strategy coming out later this year, although by the time this airs, it could already be out because time is weird. But I love that. I was leery at first that it wasn't pixel art because I think it would have looked great as pixel art, but the 3D models will look really good. The cinematic kind of boss fights that they created in their previous game only got better in this game, like the way you can engage in combat through the movement of the game. And then just Samus's design and how it's evolved and how Samus has grown as a character, both in the design, the look, and just her stance and how she carries herself. Like all of it is great. And like, I remember a lot of people complaining, like, oh, you know, it's a side scroller. Who we're not going to get to really see these characters. But the way they kind of worked on the cutscenes and like the flow, this game runs so smoothly. The flow between combat and cinematic is almost seamless, and I love that about this entry into the series.
And you get moments where it does kind of become 3D, certainly in presentation and scope, if still 2D enough in gameplay that you don't become wildly disoriented. And during boss fights, during Emmy segments, those things happen, and some of them take you by surprise, but you're able to get your bearings quickly, and other times you get used to what it is, and it becomes this almost treat that you get to engage in while you live a cinematic moment, which I think is a great evolution of QuickTime events, frankly.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. It feels to talk about like you're talking about a QuickTime event, but you are still in those moments choosing which weapon you're firing with. You're still making those snap decisions, and those moments happen quickly and without a lot of warning, usually when you trigger them. So you are reacting in the same way that Samus would have to react to figure out, oh, okay, I am falling this distance, dodging this thing's attacks, and also I need to shoot it in this spot with missiles. Go. You've got 6 seconds to fire off as many as you can, or you've got to do another round of this.
Exactly. And the fact that as far as the QuickTime eventiest thing that you have is the melee counter button, which is just one button. So if that thing of like wait on timing and whatnot, that would happen in or out of a cutscene. So that also makes it feel less gimmicky or hokey. It makes it feel part of the whole.
Yeah. I mean, also, the graphics were so good that every time... So for those who may not know, if you're listening to this having not played the game, welcome. I don't know why you're here, but we're happy to have you. The Emmys are instant death until you can actually fight them back. And every time Samus was insta-killed by an Emmy, I tensed up. Like, it's just so masterfully done. It's not even gory or graphic in that way. It's just
evocative.
Right. It happens in a way that you flinch every time because it's akin to almost a jump scare. And I loved that about this game.
It's also this amazing game of chicken. We talked about those moments in our original episode. But the thing I had not totally realized yet is the timing on when to dodge changes every time. It is not as though you can build muscle memory, Emmy to Emmy, about how long they take. You're truly like holding long enough to see, okay, should I press the button now? Should I press it now? Should I press it? And go. And if you are dead on, and somehow despite the randomness, I felt like I got better at this.
Yeah.
Over the game. But if you are dead on, you can escape. And those moments are so satisfying. And when you miss it because you are so tense and you are so just waiting for any like hint that you should press the button, it hits hard when it hits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I love the clip I shared in our chat that we referenced earlier of Some Call Me Johnny when he was prepping for his episode, how he jumped over an Emmy by the skin of his teeth. And it's like, I didn't even know you could pull moves like that. And it's clear from the clip, like, Johnny wasn't intending to do that. He just barely got by and got lucky. And I love that this game facilitated that, but also still had hard-hitting boss battles that were akin to, for people who like those games, Souls games, but I felt more rewarding because every time I died, this is a game design thing I will never understand. But this game and its boss battles, every time I died and went back to the boss, I felt like I knew a little more. I got a little better. Even with the final boss, who when I first fought, felt impossible. I was like, I'm never going to beat this boss. And yet every time I fought him, I got a little further and a little further. And I don't even know how you design for that, but it's my favorite thing about this game and Metroid games in general, because they've all had that kind of boss design.
You know, I think there was a point, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, really once we got past the N64 era and into the GameCube era and people started getting more comfortable with the 3D game design tools, where it feels like developers of this kind of game and of platformers, where boss fights are really reaction-based, moved away from a recognizable pattern or series of patterns that are chosen at random with timing and cues to let a player signal, okay, I need to dodge in this way. And I feel like there's a very specific skill set in crafting satisfying versions of that. I think we lost that for a while, and we're starting to see that come back in games like this, because this, more than any, and I am not like deeply into Souls-like games, but more than any boss fight in a game like that, this feels like something that I truly would have played on an NES in the best possible way. Right. It reminded me of learning patterns of boss fights in one of my favorite NES games, Darkwing Duck.
Yes.
And finally, like, just working through enough to beat Steelbeak and get through the end of the game without dying too many times, because then you start over from the top, and in one sitting. I think that style of design is just something that went away for a while, and I'm so glad to see it come back.
It feels very deliberate in its choices and its design. And yeah, you're right. A lot of Capcom games, certainly of the NES era, some of them were even it just cycles through this, all right? Like, Top Man is always going to throw 3 tops, and he's going to spin across the room. Get used to it. But as AI gets better, as design gets more deliberate, you can draw patterns out of foes. You can telegraph more subtly about things. And those are those ways that you probably did get a lot better at dodging the Emmys, Alex, because you got more and more in tune with the small, subtle signals that could happen in terms of when is it about to strike. And you can get that in an enclosed space of a boss battle. You know, you learn an environment, cool, great, things come and go, you respawn stuff, whatever, but a boss fight, that sort of one-on-one duel or one-on environment or whatever it is, the sophistication of technology, of design, allows us to get those subtleties, the same way that we've often talked about nostalgia or neo-retro games being how we remember those games being, not how they actually were. And this feels like that kind of evolution, while also not being beholden to pixel art or chiptunes.
There's also a key detail that is, I mean, very much Metroid in its DNA, but any boss fight you're struggling with, you can always just choose not to do it. You can choose to go back and find more power-ups and just give yourself an advantage. So anytime I'm throwing myself at the same boss over and over and over again, I'm doing it knowing I have another choice, but I feel like I'm getting better. I feel like one more time might be it. 20 times later may be it. But every time I feel like I can learn this and I can do this and I don't have to go do the thing. And if I need to, I can do the thing. That element of choice, though, the choice to keep fighting it rather than saying, well, I'm stuck, I'm soft locked, I'm done, I'm going to walk away, like the time I saved too deep into a cave in Final Fantasy II and never came back to it because I couldn't get out without dying.
It's true.
Like, it's an important distinction, I think, just in terms of player psychology.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, and it's weird, right? Because I'm someone who is a champion for make games easier with worse graphics at shorter development times and shorter play times. And yet this game, maybe I can play more difficult games. I'm like, but it's weird. I only engage with difficult games. Like, it's why I championed The Messenger for so long, which is a great 2D platformer, Metroidvania-esque kind of action game. That game was really hard. And when I was on a podcast talking about it, my friends were like, oh yeah, none of us finished it because it was too hard. And I went, really? I'm not good at games, but I finished it. And I think it's got to fit the right mold for me. And I think that the Metroidvania, specifically Metroid 2D games, are something I love so deeply that I'm willing to throw myself at it in a different way. But again, I never felt like I was stuck. The first time I tried any boss battle, I often did. But then I would go back and in the second attempt go, oh, I discovered a thing, or oh, I got a little further, and that would egg me on. And I think, a ton of these design aesthetics are for that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, I've referenced, I think, in our conversation once before we hit record and once after Souls-like games twice now. Here is my experience with those. I played the original Demon's Souls far enough to beat the first boss, said I will return to this when I stop feeling satisfaction for having gotten this far, and this many years later still have never put it back in my PS3. When that high wears off, I'll go fight the second boss.
There you go.
can I train with you on a mountain or something? Because that's incredible.
It's a very zen attitude. I want to talk about something that I feel like I only often want to talk about with the Metroid games versus a lot of other games, but the sound design, and specifically the environmental sound work in this game. Like, Metroid is rarely, I feel like, touted for its soundtrack in the fact that it's not the same way you would love a pop or popcorn related soundtrack, something you can just jam to while listening, working on something. It's not the same kind of pop culture permeation, but like every time I'm in a Metroid game, if I'm not noticing the soundtrack, I consider that a good thing, right? I want to be immersed in this world, and the sound design and the soundtrack for this Metroid game, I think, is the best yet. They go back to themes from previous games, but for the most part, it's its own thing. And I think that I felt more immersed in this game than I've ever felt in a Metroid game before, and I felt immersed in all of those other games.
Yeah. Metroid's more venerated for its soundscape than its soundtrack.
Yeah. And I think that this game does that really well. I think also, like, some people complain about the plot a little bit, and I could see where if you're not familiar with Metroid, or if you don't play a lot of Metroid games, which then I don't know quite why you would play this game, I guess just to try the new thing, or you work for a website, or you just want to get into Metroid with this game.
Or it's been nearly 2 decades since the last one, and now you're old enough to play it. Like, I don't know.
Right, it could be anything, but like there were some complaints about the story feeling a little like heavy-handed or even too short or uninteresting, and I can understand where that comes from. But as a Metroid fan and as someone who Fusion was one of my favorite games of all time, I feel like this is the perfect coda to this story. I think the narrative is just there enough that it feels part of it. It doesn't feel as like stop and go as Fusion does with Adam, or who we find out to be Adam, stopping you every 10 minutes. But like for me, and we're going to get a little bit into spoiler for late game stuff now, and we're going to dip in and out. So, I think if you really don't want to be spoiled, my best recommendation is to stop listening now and go play this game, because that's I think the only way going forward we can avoid spoilers. But like the first time I saw the X-Parasite, the way my heart just swelled up, like I just welled up with tears, because I was like, this is now my favorite game being referenced in this game, and now it's a part of this game. And like that whole back half of the game is now you're fighting not just these creatures, but you're also fighting the X-Parasite again, as if you were in Fusion again. Like that reveal was so well done and so awesome. Like that's why I'm playing this game, for moments like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that people... And I get it. I'm not saying it's not a valid complaint. I think if you haven't played the other games, it's not even necessarily maybe a lack of plot, but if you haven't played the other games, the references and the history don't have context. You don't necessarily get a lot in game to tell you why certain things are important. That is a valid complaint to me 100%. But the thing that I think really this game does past a certain point is it ties together some elements, less in a way that closes any overarching story, because story has always been pretty light, but in a way that kind of recontextualizes this world to move forward. And there's a character who is very important in this, who we've never seen before.
Nope.
We're as in the dark as anyone else with experience about who that character is and what that character's connection to Samus is. And I'll be honest, there are parts of lore I was rusty on.
Yeah,
that
same.
I had to connect some dots and be like, oh yeah, that did happen in that game that I played 19 years ago. But the thing that is funny to me is the Metroid games that have stumbled the most have actually been the ones with the most story, where a narrative framework and a true like plot-driven story is wrapped around what this game does. That's been a liability in the past for the series. So be careful what you wish for, I think, is my takeaway there.
Yeah, I feel like this is as much story or story moments as a Metroid game should have. Maybe something will come in the future to prove me wrong, but this feels like we're nearing the limit.
Yeah. And like speaking to the story, and again, continuing into heavy spoilers, the way this game resolves, the ending, the final moments of this game feel like a gift to anyone who likes this franchise, right? Like, and it's funny because Alex, you off air had some theories about what the ending would be, and you weren't completely off base. Like you weren't. I don't know. I'm trying to remember loosely what your initial theory was, and I feel like you you tiptoed around it, but like essentially you had a variance of the theory that Samus is now a Metroid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think between Geoff and me, to borrow this is not a current cultural reference, but there's this line from the Fairly Odd Parents, "We're two halves of a whole idiot."
Yep.
Yeah.
That pops into my brain every now and then. This is one of those times. Geoff and I were two halves of a whole idiot in that moment.
Yeah.
I think I got halfway there with a theory about maybe there's a clone running around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Geoff connected the rest of those dots. And if we had really stopped and thought and talked together for like 30 seconds longer, we would have gotten it.
Yeah.
It's fair, yeah.
But like, I love this idea that like Metroid is officially the thing that she has hunted all this time. She is the last Metroid, right? Because I also had friends like trying to justify, I don't understand why these games are still called Metroids. They're all dead now. There are none in this game. And like, I couldn't tell them. But this is why. It's because Samus is now the last living Metroid. Her DNA is completely fused with the Metroid DNA, and like that final armor and that final scene is so cool. And like, it's all fan service, but I don't care. It's exactly what I wanted.
Well, the narrative build to that is just, you are told so many times, you can't do it, you cannot do it, you cannot do this. No, you can't do it. And the weight of all that history, having fought through all this, dealt with the like guilt over the Metroids and reconnecting to them by having them infused into her, that is what saves her ass.
Yeah. And the fact that Metroid is like the Chozo word for ultimate warrior or like kind of thing. And all right, even more. Here we go. Here's Samus. And the conflict with Ravenbeak and everything else being a sort of thing of like, become this ultimate being. Screw you. I'm going to do it, but not for you.
Yeah. It's funny. Also, like, I've completed 2 Metroid games, I think. I've completed Super Metroid. That was a pain in the ass. And of course, I completed Metroid Fusion. You know, I still haven't completed Samus Returns, the remake. But like, I have fond thoughts of going back. I didn't complete this game either. Like, and what I mean is 100% completion, exposing the map, getting all the items. But I feel like because it's only 8 hours long narratively, I am in a place where I could easily play through it again and then feel that inspiration. Like, if there's a lull in games, which if February is any indicator as of when we're recording this, there won't be a lull in games. But like, if there is a lull in games, or like my December of this year is like my December of last year, and I can catch up on stuff and replay old stuff, I could see myself doing that with this game in a way that I haven't really done with other games. And I think that speaks to the flow of this game. Its narrative is just long enough, and the maps are designed in a way. I would say that this isn't the best map we've seen in a Metroid game. I think like there's this mix of like Fusion and Super Metroid that in my mind is like the perfect map layout. But it's a good map layout, and like I like the different biomes, and so I'm interested in going back and replaying it and seeing what it's like on a second playthrough, how much I even remember, how much I retained, you know, because that's my favorite thing about going back to old Metroid games is like, do I remember any of the secrets? Do I remember where to find stuff? Am I going to get stuck in the same place again? Like that one elevator room that we literally all got stuck in, which is like my only design complaint.
Not only the three of us, every person I have read or heard talk about this game has referenced this one spot that they got stuck. And listening to them talk about it and talk around it, I think nearly every person who has played this game got stuck in that moment.
Yeah.
I am dead serious. I think that is the one, like, legit, hey, we forgot to telegraph something moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's the one real design flaw in this game is there's one point where you will be like, what the fuck where do I go? Oh, I break this wall that I had no indication that I needed to break.
I'm gonna be real with you. I actually didn't get stuck there, but I think that's because I heard, and people didn't even say elevator room. People were just like, there's a spot where you just kind of get stuck. And I'm like, well, I just randomly shoot at everything anyway. So keep doing that. Cool.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be
that.
like, I'm a next level gamer. It's just like, I accidentally was warned obliquely enough.
I do want to ask though, if you guys have a favorite moment in the game, whether it's related to a boss, the narrative, you know, just the design. I mean, I think like it's hard to not pick the ending of the game as a favorite moment just because of the final armor is badass. Samus looks awesome. The way they resolve the story is awesome. But I think for me, and I teased it a little earlier, is there's this moment where I think it's after you speak to Quiet Beak. I think that was his name. It was Quiet Beak, wasn't it?
That sounds right.
Are they all
names
beaks?
are tough in the Metroid franchise, but like when the
Quiet Robe, Raven Beak.
Yeah.
Raven Beak and Quiet Robe. When Quiet Robe, we find out that Quiet Robe is an X-Parasite and then releases the X-Parasites. Like, that's such a cool moment for me because it, again, as I said earlier, is fusing my favorite game with this new game. But also, I think the first time you encounter an ME, that first insta-death, like, is just a moment that you can't repeat in a game because the expectation, like, we knew that we were going to be running from these things, but the way that whole design is set up and the way that they interact, like, and they look really cool also, they just have a really neat design aesthetic. But I'm curious if you both have like standout moments that you really like, this is one of the greatest moments in this game for me.
I have one. It's not narrative. It's more experiential, right? But going back to the Emmys, there was an Emmy that caught me and I escaped. And I ran into a corner accidentally and it caught me again and I escaped again. And in that moment, back to Zen on the mountain, right? In that moment, I will never do this again. I know I will never do this again. This is not even a matter of skill, right? It's a matter of luck and timing and maybe reading a cue a little bit, but mostly those first two things. I will never feel more accomplished playing this game than this moment. And just the fact that it can work that way and you can get that amount of satisfaction out of a mundane piece of a central loop. You will get caught, you will get killed, you might escape. The fact that that's so satisfying, that, ignoring the end of the game, that is one of the moments that sticks with me the most. Just, oh shit, I did that?
I love that.
You're pulling a homer, you're succeeding in a spectacularly miserable fashion.
Yeah.
And I guess to get to mine, I do want to say for a moment on some earlier points, I feel good Metroidvania design and something that Metroid Dread has is this nested loop of exploration, discovery, mastery. That is the process. And I think all of us and a lot of people, you play Metroid Dread or any of these games like, I don't want to be spoiled. I'm just going to explore. If I'm super stuck, I'll look something up, but screw it. You explore, you discover, you learn it. You play it again. Now I'm going to look at everything. I want to find everything in the map. You explore, you discover, you master. And you take all of the new buttons that you now have to do and you get used to this and that and the other thing. And something that we talked about in episode 114 of Fun and Games, I wanted to do that, to reference that just because this is our most like old school Marvel Comics moment. If you want to learn about what we talked about, go to episode 114, true believers. Anyway.
Thanks, Dan.
Anyway, something that we talked about there was how, even though there was a lot of old familiar items and upgrades in Metroid Dread, they did them a little out of order. I think all of us had a moment of, it has been a while into this game and I do not have the morph ball yet. Am I doing this wrong?
Did I miss something?
Crap. And then you get it and it's great and it's fine. And they can do that because they give you the slide and they make these other things that can kind of move you into one way or another. But I think one of the big moments for me, and I definitely love the Emmy moments and the way they move, and like the first time that I was able to like take down the shield and take it down feels great. I think a big moment for me was when I finally got the power bomb, because the design of Metroid Dread does a very good, they do excellent work of kind of shepherding you towards the next area, towards the next deal. You find an item and you also find a teleporter or a transport to a new area. And I think my one complaint about this game is that the loading between areas is a little too long. Yeah. If they made that a little more seamless, I don't think that's their fault. If they made that a little more seamless, this would be beyond reproach. And it kind of sets you up and does that. The power bomb, you have been finding ammo for it, and they've been great about like, you don't have this item yet, but here's some more ammo. So you get it, it unlocks, and the feeling of mass destruction that you get after like having to sneak around and having to be so very careful about everything, and like this thing leads into here and oh god, I can't get out of there, and you've already gotten like so many other traversal methods, and you've got the screw attack, you've got the speed boost, maybe you've gotten good at shine sparking, who knows. Power bomb, charge it up, blow up half the room, keep going. You can go finish the game right now, or do you want to see what you can do with this? And even without looking up walkthroughs or what I'm missing, it felt very satisfying, and somewhere between that, just like a super fast exploration, discovery, mastery of I am going to. There is nothing holding me back. It felt a great narrative moment of I am ready to take on whatever is coming at me here. And it's not entirely true, but it gives you that feeling, so it is true. I think that was a favorite moment for me.
I like that you bring up the shine sparking because, like, Metroid has always had puzzles in it, but they aren't puzzles in the way you would imagine other games have puzzles. And shine sparking, especially in Super Metroid, like, and Metroid Fusion, some of them are really interesting, but still fairly straightforward. However, in this game, the way they design some of the shine sparking is why I don't know if I will ever 100% complete it, because literally from jump to wall jump into ball, all while shine sparking or sliding out of the shine spark and things like that are fascinating. I've watched some speedrunners do them. I've seen clips online. I love that that's an element of the game that I don't even know I could touch, but I'm glad is there, because it's not something I would have thought of in the earlier Metroid games, but feels like a no-brainer now, especially on modern hardware, when you can do those kind of seamless room transitions and like zigzag your way to a reward just by utilizing the shine spark.
There's another product of what you were talking about, Geoff, in moving some of the most powerful things or things we're used to having to the end of the game. At least for me, that was by the time we got certain items. And a great example is the Storm Missile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are times the Storm Missile was super useful. But there were also fights, like mini bosses, where you had 2 or 3 very fast, very powerful, very strong enemies. I would try to use that. The first few battles, I think there's one right after you get it. The first few of those you run into, I would try to use the Storm Missile. Not the first few times, not the first few encounters. I would try to use that, and I was dying. I was dying too quickly. It was taking me too long to charge up, too long to do it. I had an easier time just taking my time and using the regular super missiles and missiles, and not trying to use the new toys, trying to just wait them out and chip away. And that it has that flexibility, that it has room to say, you got this cool new toy, you can use it, or not, actually. That's also really great design to me, because it does make it a little more forgiving, right? It isn't just immediately master this. It is, okay, you've got this. This is a new thing. You can get by without it, but if you get it quickly, it will make your life easier.
Absolutely.
It's funny you mentioned that room, too, because I had the exact opposite problem. So I got the Storm Missile, got to that room with the 2 Chozo guards, and kept dying. And I'm like, it was the only fight where I was like, I'm actually getting mad. I'm frustrated. I can't beat this fight. What am I missing? I'm not learning anything. I almost Dark Souls my way through it, beating them without the Storm Missile. And then I looked up online. It was like, you could use the Storm Missile, makes this fight go much easier. And I was the opposite. Like, it just changed the battle and opened my brain. I was like, I'm an idiot. I just got this power up. Why am I not using it? Like, I was so set in my ways because I had plotted my way through this game that when I got that upgrade, I was like, I don't need that. I just got to beat these guys.
Right.
And so, like, I love that we had the exact opposite experiences with the same thing. And any game that does that is always pretty high up in my book, when multiple people can have different experiences and share stories of the same thing.
Yeah, and the fact that in your inventory acquisition, in item whatever it is, if it is obsolete, it gets replaced. Super missiles replace missiles. When you have that, awesome, fantastic. But if it's still in your arsenal, it still can be and is relevant somehow. And I think that's smart and efficient, and I like it.
It's also, what we're talking about is the microcosm of what I think this game does incredibly well, which is, I've listened to a lot of people talk about it and how it feels so open and like you can go any direction. And in the way that that's always true of a Metroid game, that's true of this game. But actually, like, the core path through this game, in a lot of ways, feels as precise and specific, and there is one critical path that you have to take much of the time. I feel that more in this game than I do maybe in any other Metroid game. And I think this illusion of you can do anything, layered on top of, but you have to do that this way, is also really, really well executed and clever here. That the illusion of choice,
Yes.
Yeah.
The illusion of choice is hard, I think tremendously hard to pull off in the way that this game does. And sometimes it gives you choices in those small moments to make those big moments feel like you have choice where you don't.
Yes, because a fully open world design actually isn't what people necessarily want when they say they want more open world design. Some maybe, but those are sandbox games. But if you want a narrative game, something has to be, you have to have open choice in an aspect. And the way that there's sometimes you can't go back for a little while in an area in a Metroid game feels like anathema to its core design, but it means that you then have some challenges ahead of you that you can go at in whatever way you want. Metroid has always, or for a very long time, has had sequence breaking built into it, but you don't have to, but you can. And those choices are there, that illusion of choice, those moments where it's like, here is everything at your disposal. We're not going to tell you what you have to do. We're not going to give you one solution. Have fun. And that's when it becomes open and then closed and open and closed. And I think that motion is key.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game was a nice in-between from Super Metroid and Fusion, because I think that, like, the biggest complaint I hear about Fusion, even though it's not a complaint for me, is that it's so segmented. You have to go this path. You cannot backtrack in Fusion until, like, the very end, and even then, it's limited, right? Like, you are expected to follow this path. This game does that for some of the story beats and some of the sections, but still allows you to explore several areas, even if you can't explore all of them or backtrack to all of them. And I think it's a nice way of kind of giving a rail for people who want to follow that straight path. But like Geoff said, still allowing you to sequence break and just kind of play around if that's what you want to do as well. Which was a complaint about the previous game for a lot of folks, is that you couldn't just explore at a whim like you could in Super Metroid. And I personally liked having that rail. I like open world games, but like, as I've talked about very recently, I like them less because I feel so overwhelmed in them. Whereas if I'm playing a narrative hallway game, as it were, I at least know where I gotta go. And like, the goal is ahead of me. I got shit to do. I got other games to play. Like, let me just get to the end. And this felt like a nice compromise between the two. In a way that other games of this ilk don't always. Like, I love Hollow Knight. I beat the first couple of bosses in it, but it's so open and so explorative and so hard that I was like, yeah, I beat that second boss, and very similar to you, Alex. I was like, this was awesome. That was great. I think I'm done for now, which is fine. Yeah. Like, I do want to go back to Hollow Knight. I think it does get the evolution of Metroidvania better than a lot of other games. But that said, I don't know that, like, another complaint about this game was that it didn't innovate enough. And while I can see how you would see that, I don't know that I wanted it to.
I feel it more sets a new standard than innovates.
Right. And things like the counter and the slide. Like, I know we've talked about this on that previous episode and just in our fanboy chat. I don't know that I can play a Metroid game without the counter and the slide now. Like, I want them to remake Fusion and Super Metroid, not necessarily because we need a remake, because those games are still perfectly playable as they are, but because I want new design elements with those things that feel so now core to the Metroid experience, because they work so well. And so, like, I think more things like that come to mind more than, like, it's not good enough. It's more, this is the perfection of what I wanted in a Metroid game. And, like, I hinted at this in the previous episode, but now I think I can say with great defiance, or, like, permanence even, that this is my favorite Metroid game. I love Fusion, but this is the best Metroid has ever been, to me at least, as a Metroid fan.
What you're saying reminds me a lot of the conversation that happened when Breath of the Wild and Horizon Zero Dawn came out at the same time. Because Horizon Zero Dawn, I think in a lot of ways, is the pinnacle of a certain style of open world game, which is, and when I played through it, and I'm not a big open world game person, it is one of my favorite games of all time. Despite that, it signposts and guides you so cleverly that you could go anywhere. At one point, I did in fact wander into one of the most late stage areas of the game and trigger a cutscene I should not have seen. But I did that because I ignored clearly signposting, like, kind of in defiance of the game, was like, this is so well constructed, what happens if I try to break it? I got curious in that way, and that's on me. But this feels like that. This takes all of the elements of Metroid and creates This is the optimal version of Metroid as we have known it so far. And I think in the same way that this is the last game about the story of the Metroids, and it sets the stage for something new. I actually could see where how this game ends in Samus's status quo now sets the stage for more new things in the future, for biological versions of weapons, for all kinds of different interface. I mean, if Metroids steal powers and abilities from other creatures, can Samus do that now to biological organisms? There are a lot of questions. And maybe the next game is the Breath of the Wild of Metroid. It's the shocking, exciting new version of this thing that has been honed now. In the same way that I think it was that to Horizon Zero Dawn, right? That Breath of the Wild was.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, that leads me to our concluding thoughts as we wrap up. Like, what do you want from the next Metroid game, right? Like, it's weird for me. I still exist in this brain space where I still don't think we'll get another 2D Metroid. But we just got one, and it's sold like gangbusters in a way this series has never sold before. And so, like, we will probably get a Metroid 7, or a Metroid 6, rather, but it may not necessarily be a Metroid 6. It may still be a side-scrolling. It may be innovative, but it could even realistically not star Samus. And I of course would prefer to have Samus, but I could see a way in which the narrative goes to maybe Samus is a character you play later, like what Devil May Cry 4 did famously, where you play as Nero for a good chunk of that game, and then they give you Dante back towards the end going, here's the character you love, now here, let's bring this narrative together. But I'm curious what you guys want. For me, it's hard. I'm in this rare space with games where I was like, I don't know what I want. The sky's the limit. Like, we already have Metroid Prime, and we know a fourth one's coming, and we know the re-release, at least of the first game, is coming. So, like, I don't know that we need to change the style or the view of it. Like, it should still be a side-scrolling Metroidvania. But, like, the kinds of mechanics you can put in, like Alex is alluding to, you could have a Mega Man style Metroid game where Samus is stealing the powers of every boss. And like Fusion sort of did that, right? And this game sort of did that. When you beat certain bosses, you unlocked Samus's typical abilities. But imagine if Samus doesn't have a morph ball in the next game. Instead, they turn into a slug slime creature because of their new bioorganics and can just like crawl through the space that way. Like, those kinds of things are really fascinating to me, where we can turn it on its head and like not give Samus any of the upgrades they've had before, or at least put a coat of paint on them that they've never had before.
Yeah, there's a lot to explore with that, and I'm always going to be in favor of more well-designed Metroidvania games and the Metroid series. And yeah, like, Metroid Dread feels like such a beautiful, obvious in hindsight game, that everything is leading up to it, that Samus Returns was the dress rehearsal for this. And yeah, I've wanted a Metroidvania Mega Man forever. And the Mega Man Zero series scratches that itch. Some.
It does.
It does. It does. But I want the Metroid version. I want the spooky bio-horror, but not really, version of that. And yeah, I want to see where this goes. Would it be segmented explorations of different planets? Would it be a mission-based thing? A la, to go with the other half of Metroidvania with Order of Ecclesia from Castlevania. Something like that. I don't know. I'd love to see that. Maybe that's a way that you have some non-Samus characters as playable. I don't know. I'm just excited.
So I talked about this a little bit the last time we talked about this game. But to me, Metroid feels like a series that leads first with theme and tone, and then makes design decisions based around those goals. Whether that's the reality of that process or not, I do not know. But it feels that way because those ideas tend to be tight and central to each game. And those are really the things that change and evolve game to game. I think the idea of Samus having to come to terms with what is she now? What is her relationship to other living creatures? Is she a weapon? Is she a threat? Can she control this? Because that, to me, is the biggest question open at the end of this. How much control does she truly have? I think that sets up an experience that... I mean, the question becomes, am I the monster, right? We've seen Samus facing her darkest self in Fusion to a degree and in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. But I think there is an evolution of both of those ideas. That is Samus the monster? Is Samus being hunted by some of the ancillary characters we've seen in Metroid Prime Hunters or something like that? The other question I would have is, Metroid Prime 4 was something that got announced without a lot of information. This game basically seems to have lapped it in terms of development. How much of the success of this game, depending on where Metroid Prime 4, which we still have not seen footage of, is in development, how much does this influence that game? Is there a version of Metroid Prime 4? Because that trilogy is a complete unit in itself, in the same way that these 5 games are a complete unit. Is there a version of 4 that bridges these trilogies in a way where you are... Because to me, that is the ideal way to explore that idea, that you are in fact on the run, that you are viewed as a threat, that you are in danger. And I think those games give a little more room to narrative than the side-scrollers do. Maybe that's my answer. Maybe that is, I want to see this actually pick up and influence a Prime game, and then let that help set a status quo for the next chapter in what I think to all of us is how we feel, the kind of main series Metroid.
Yeah. Well, and especially since up until this point, Metroids, the Metroid have been a thing to be hunted, a thing to be feared, a thing to be exploited, a thing to be studied. And with Samus's current status, what does that mean for her? And what does that mean for how, her place in everything? And yeah, I look forward to seeing how that influences Prime and where that goes forward.
Yeah, I'm of two minds. Like, do I want to see Samus become the villain? Not really. I don't.
Oh no, not necessarily the villain,
but like to be like, for the perspective of the character to turn on its head. I mean, I think that Curse of the Moon, a game that Geoff and I celebrate a lot, did some interesting things with the main character and how he's the hero until he's not, because he becomes the villain. Mm-hmm. And like, those narratives are always interesting, but I prefer those narratives to be about white men, and we can keep our minorities and our other genders to still being the heroes, because there's not enough of them. But it would be cool if, like, even how we not that long ago, as of when we're recording, did a Castlevania episode, how Lords of Shadow, also that narrative turns it on its head, where you become Dracula, but then in the second game you play as Dracula. And like, that would be awesome if Metroid did that. Like in Prime 4, you pick up Samus's story, and now you are the Metroid. You are the enemy as viewed by the greater galaxy, and you have to try and prove that you're not, or find an escape, or take some downtime and train a recruit to like help you explore, or like become the old Bruce Wayne to the Batman Beyond almost. Like, all of those kinds of things are possible. And I love when stories are at their most open and anything can happen next. Those are my favorite moments to be within a franchise, because, you know, it's, without spoiling it, it's kind of like how Spider-Man No Way Home ends, right? It's this idea that now the Spider-Man franchise can really do anything with this version of Spider-Man. And that's pretty cool. And I love that for this series as well. A series I love, that I followed the narrative so closely, even though the narrative has been sprinkled throughout. Now there's literally nothing in front of it. It could be anything they want it to be, and that kind of freedom for the designers and the creators, at least, must be kind of freeing, to also kind of put a little bow on it and then be able to do whatever they want.
Samus is Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy, just alone on the island, doesn't want to be bothered, views herself as the monster, got to bring her out of retirement.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And Metroid, we've never really gotten a narrative perspective from them.
Right.
It's not a thing of, they're not necessarily going out and conquering worlds. They are simply existing. Right. And that's why I mentioned before that they are a thing that is hunted and exploited. And there's like strange balance of things. And so to have that perspective from a character who has been a viewpoint character for us, what does that mean? Is this weird instincts? Is this, the Metroid aren't bad. They just live within their ecosystem. And we went, well, this is incredible. And exploitation and capitalism and space pirates and Federation and et cetera. So, and all of this with a neat bow on top of an excellent gameplay experience.
There we go. There is the middle ground between Samus viewed as villain and Samus getting to be Samus. Samus is branded an eco-terrorist.
Samus on the run. I mean, we were
Samus
even
on the run.
at the beginning of Metroid Dread. We're like, didn't she like blow up Federation property? They're like, no. That was just a weird, crazy splinter group within the Federation. Yeah, but shouldn't she have made some enemies there?
They do kind of make that bit disappear, which I think is
Just
hilarious.
right. So let's see what happens next time.
Yeah, right? Clearly, she has more destructive power now, for sure. As
And
shown
that
by
can't
the
just
end
be
of that.
ignored.
Right. Yeah. Can't just be like, oh, you're just a bounty hunter. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Well, this has been a great discussion. I feel like we've only barely scratched the surface, and we've been talking for almost an hour. But like, I think with a game like this, especially as new as it is, it's like I feel like I could almost see us doing a part 2, like 2 years from now, when we've had some time with this game or there's more info on other Metroid stuff. But I want to thank you both for joining me on this longer form 50 milestone episode of SideQuest for episode 150. Geoff, and then Alex, why don't you tell folks where they can find you? I feel like folks should know where they can find Geoff, but it's always nice to remind them. And then Alex, of course, after that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can find me in podcast form on our mainline Fun and Games series every other Friday on the Certain POV network. And you can find me on Twitter at Geoff, Geoff, makes noise, and on Twitch at not Geoff at all, and that's Geoff with a J. Are you confused? Good.
I am much more simply just on Twitter at AlexLavelle2005. I mentioned all the podcasts at the top. Panelology is the main one. That's at Panelology on Twitter. I'm not on other social media. I don't stream. I'm not on-camera talent, and I'm happy to not be on-camera talent. So there you go. That's it. That's where you can find me.
Amazing. And of course, you can find me at DJ_Stormageddon in most places. You can go to DJStormageddon.com to find literally everything that I do. And it is a lot. I know it's probably too much, but here we are. I want to thank both of you for joining me on this journey. I knew from the moment in that Discord call with Alex that this was going to be something that we talked about a bunch. And I'm looking forward to the future of this franchise in a way that I never had before. And I'm so glad that we got to talk about it here on SideQuests. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please rate and review, subscribe wherever you can. Please share this episode with a Metroid lover in your life. And as always, remember, happy gaming.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.